They tried to erase us from the galaxy. We survived 3,000 years in the void between stars. Now we've returned, not for revenge, but with something far more terrifying. Mercy. The Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council had stood for 12,000 years, a monument to order and civilization. Its crystalline walls had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the negotiation of 1,000 peace treaties, and the prevention of countless wars. But today, for the first time in recorded history, the hall was completely silent. High Arbiter Velshan of the Craxian Dominion stood at the central podium, his forearms trembling as he held the data slate. Around him, representatives from 300 starfaring civilizations waited, their various appendages, tentacles, and sensory organs focused entirely on him. The holographic display above showed something that shouldn't have been possible, couldn't have been possible. "They're back," Velshan said, his translator struggling to convey the mixture of awe and terror in his voice. "The humans are back." A wave of disbelief rippled through the assembly. The Kuvari delegate's bioluminescent skin flickered with anxiety. The crystalline Thranx representative's form actually cracked slightly, something that only happened under extreme stress. And the ancient Zephyron observer, who had personally witnessed the banishment 3,000 years ago, began emitting a low-frequency wail of dread. "Impossible," declared Ambassador Teren of the Ashkar Unity, her voice sharp and certain. "We drove them to the outer darkness beyond the galactic rim. We destroyed their ships, shattered their colonies, and sent them into the void with nothing but basic survival technology. We made sure they could never return. The radiation belts alone should have—" "Show them," Velshan interrupted, his voice hollow. The hologram shifted, displaying the edge of charted space. There, like a swarm of ancient locusts from Earth's own history, thousands upon thousands of ships emerged from faster-than-light travel. But these weren't the primitive vessels humanity had been forced to flee in. These were something else entirely. The ships were massive, each one easily 10 times the size of the Council's largest dreadnoughts. Their hulls seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, giving them an unsettling presence against the starfield. Strange geometries adorned their surfaces, impossible angles that hurt to look at too long, suggesting technologies that had evolved far beyond anything the Council had seen. How? The question came from a dozen delegates simultaneously, translated into a dozen languages, all expressing the same existential confusion. Velshan pulled up the sensor data. "Our long-range observation post at the galactic edge detected them 3 cycles ago. They didn't cross through the radiation belt. They went around. All the way around. They traveled thousands of light years through intergalactic void, then came back through the opposite side of the galaxy. The implications hung in the air like a death sentence. The journey humanity must have made was beyond comprehension. The intergalactic void was empty. No stars to harvest for fuel, no planets to resupply, nothing but infinite darkness and the slow, cold death of entropy. It should have taken hundreds of thousands of years, even with the basic FTL technology they'd been left with. "They should have died," whispered the Zephyron observer, his ancient voice crackling with age and fear. "We calculated it. We were certain. The provisions they could carry, the life support they could maintain, they should have died long before reaching the void. Even if they survived that, the journey around the galaxy and back would take 3,000 years, Velshan finished. Which is exactly how long they've been gone. The mathematical precision of it sent a chill through every being present. The humans hadn't just survived, they'd planned. They'd known exactly what they were doing when they fled into that darkness. "What are they doing now?" asked the Teren, though her voice had lost its certainty. "They're sitting at the edge of what used to be their territory," Velshan replied. "All 12,000 ships. Just waiting. They haven't fired a shot, haven't sent a message, haven't made any aggressive moves. They're just there. Like they're giving us time to remember what we did to them." Ambassador Cathrell of the Vaxxon Collective, whose people had been among the most vocal advocates for the banishment, spoke up, his carapace clicking with agitation. "We must strike first, before they can establish a foothold." "Before they can, with what?" Velshan's question cut through the chamber like a blade. He pulled up another hologram, this one showing a comparative analysis. "A single one of their ships has more mass than our entire border fleet. The energy readings we're getting suggest power generation capabilities that exceed our most optimistic theoretical models. And there are 12,000 of them. He paused, letting that sink in. We also tried scanning them. Standard long-range sensors. Same technology we've used for millennia. The kind of scans we've run 1 trillion times on 1 trillion different vessels. And, prompted the Kuvari delegate. And they knew. Immediately. Within microseconds of our scans touching their ships, we received a tight beam transmission. No words, no threats. Just mathematical proofs, showing us exactly how our own sensor technology works, breaking down the physics to the quantum level, and then, Velshan's voice faltered, and then showing us 17 different ways they could turn our own sensors into weapons that would tear our ships apart from the inside out. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a demonstration, the Zephyron observer said quietly. They were showing us that they understand our technology better than we do, that they've had 3,000 years to study everything we ever built, everything we ever made, and they've surpassed it all. Velshan nodded slowly. There's more. The transmission included a simple message. We remember. Those 2 words seemed to suck all the air from the chamber. They remembered. Of course they remembered. How could they forget? The banishment hadn't been a simple exile. It had been a coordinated assault by every major power in the galaxy, unified for perhaps the only time in history. Humanity had been young, brash, expanding too quickly, questioning too many of the Council's ancient laws. They'd developed technologies without permission, colonized worlds without approval, and worst of all, they'd been happy. Joyfully, defiantly, impossibly happy in their chaotic, individualistic way. The Council, in its infinite wisdom accumulated over millions of years, had decided that humanity was a threat to the cosmic order, not because they were violent, though they could be. Not because they were expansionist, everyone was to some degree, but because they were unpredictable, uncontrollable, and their very existence challenged the careful hierarchies that had maintained peace for eons. So the Council had done what it always did with problems it couldn't solve diplomatically. It removed them. The attack had been swift and brutal. Human colonies burned. Their ships were destroyed. Billions died in the first wave. The survivors, maybe a few million, were herded into whatever vessels could still fly and driven out beyond the galactic rim with just enough technology to survive, but not enough to ever threaten the Council again. Or so they'd thought. What do we do? The question came from a junior delegate from one of the smaller civilizations, brave or foolish enough to voice what everyone was thinking. Velshan looked at the hologram of those waiting ships, dark and patient and utterly terrifying in their silence. I don't know, he admitted. For the first time in my 3 centuries of service to this Council, I genuinely don't know. The Zephyron observer rose slowly, his ancient form seeming to carry the weight of millennia. I was there, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. I was there when we cast them out. I voted for it. I believed it was necessary for the greater good of the galaxy. He turned, his sensory organs fixing on each delegate in turn. I remember the last thing the human ambassador said before we destroyed her ship. She stood in her vessel's bridge, Earth burning behind her on the view screen, her people dying by the billions, and she transmitted one final message to this very chamber. The old being's voice grew quiet but somehow more powerful. She said, "You're making a terrible mistake. Humanity's greatest gift isn't our technology or our numbers. It's our memory. We will remember this. We will remember every ship you destroyed, every world you burned, every child you killed. And one day, when you least expect it, when you've forgotten all about us and returned to your comfortable order, we'll come back. And we won't come back as the victims you made us. We'll come back as the nightmare you created." The Zephyron observer's form seemed to dim. I laughed when I heard that. We all did. They were primitive, beaten, barely spacefaring. We were eternal, powerful, united. How could they ever threaten us? He gestured to the hologram of the waiting fleet. Now I understand. We didn't just banish humanity. We forged them. We took a species that was curious, hopeful, and yes, sometimes difficult, and we turned them into something else. We gave them a common enemy, a shared trauma, and 3,000 years to think about it. 3,000 years, he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. Do you know what a species can become in 3,000 years of focused determination? When every generation is raised on stories of the home they lost, the families that were murdered, the civilization that was destroyed. When their entire existence becomes about a single goal, survival and return? Velshan looked at the data slate in his hands, at the impossible ships on the screen, at the terrified faces of 300 civilizations' representatives. "They're waiting for our response," he said. "What should I tell them?" The chamber erupted into chaos. Some called for immediate attack. Others suggested negotiation. Many simply panicked, already calculating how quickly they could move their homeworld's resources to the opposite side of the galaxy. But above it all, the Zephyron observer's words hung like a prophecy. Tell them the truth. Tell them we're sorry. And pray to whatever gods we believe in that they're willing to listen. On the view screen, the human fleet remained motionless. 12,000 monuments to patience and fury, waiting for the galaxy to remember its sins. The ambassador's return. The message came 3 days after the Council's emergency session, during the height of their panicked deliberations. It was broadcasted simultaneously to every major hub in the galaxy, bypassing firewalls and security protocols that were supposed to be impenetrable. The fact that humanity could access their network so easily made the message's content all the more terrifying. It was simple, direct and devastating in its courtesy. To the Galactic Council, humanity requests an audience. We will send one representative to your chambers, unarmed and unescorted, to discuss the future. We await your acceptance of this meeting. You have 72 hours to respond. Captain Elena Vasquez, commander of the First Fleet. High Arbiter Velshan read the message 17 times, analyzing every word, every implication. The politeness was somehow worse than any threat could have been. It suggested confidence, absolute, unshakable confidence that they held all the cards and could afford to be gracious. "It's a trap," Ambassador Cathrell insisted, his carapace clicking frantically. "They'll send an assassin or a bomb, or they'll send exactly what they promised," interrupted Velshan. "One unarmed representative to talk, because they don't need tricks anymore. They just need us to understand how much the balance of power has shifted." The Council voted to accept the meeting. What else could they do? The human ship that arrived 3 days later was small by the standards of their fleet, barely the size of a diplomatic courier. It was sleek and dark, its hull seeming to swallow the light from nearby stars. It docked at the Council station without incident, following all the proper protocols with perfect precision. When the airlock opened, a single figure stepped through. She was human, unmistakably so. 2 arms, 2 legs, bilateral symmetry. The standard primate form that had once seemed so ordinary among the galaxy's diverse species. She wore a simple uniform of deep black with silver trim. No weapons visible, no armor, no protection at all. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical style, and her brown eyes were calm as they surveyed the assembled council representatives. But there was something different about her. Every delegate in the chamber could feel it, though few could articulate what it was. She moved with a certainty that went beyond mere confidence. She carried herself like someone who had looked into the abyss and found it lacking. "Honored delegates of the Galactic Council," she began, her voice clear and level. "My name is Ambassador Kenji Okonkwo. I speak for humanity." Velshan stepped forward, trying to maintain the diplomatic protocols that had governed this chamber for millennia. "Ambassador Okonkwo, we welcome you. We hope that we can reach an understanding that—" "Before we begin," Okonkwo interrupted gently, "I need to show you something. With your permission, I'd like to transmit a historical record to your displays." Velshan hesitated, then nodded. Security protocols be damned if humanity wanted to harm them. A data transmission was the least of their worries. The holographic displays around the chamber flickered to life. What appeared made several delegates physically recoil. It was Earth, not the vibrant blue-green world that had once been humanity's cradle, but a burning hellscape. The footage was from the Banishment, shot from orbit as Council forces had methodically destroyed every major population center. Cities evaporated under orbital bombardment. Oceans boiled. Continents cracked under the sustained assault. But that wasn't the worst of it. The display split into hundreds of feeds, showing the fate of human colonies across their former territory. Worlds that had taken generations to terraform, reduced to molten slag. Space stations vaporized with everyone inside. Colony ships destroyed as they tried to flee, their atmospheric breaches captured in horrifying detail as thousands suffocated in the void. 8,400,672,911. Okonkwo said quietly. That's how many humans died in the banishment. We counted. We remembered every single one. The footage continued. Now it showed the desperate exodus the few million survivors crammed into inadequate ships, watching their home galaxy shrink behind them as they fled into the darkness. Children crying, adults trying to be strong, the dying giving their rations to the young, all of it captured and preserved. This, Okonkwo said, gesturing to the images, is what you did to us. This is the gift the Galactic Council gave to humanity 3,000 years ago. We want to make sure you remember, because for a long time we couldn't afford to forget. Velshan felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Shame. Deep, overwhelming shame. Seeing the abstract numbers of historical records transformed into actual faces, actual lives, actual deaths, it was unbearable. He started, then stopped. What could he possibly say? Okonkwo raised a hand. Please don't apologize yet. You don't know what you're apologizing for. Let me finish. She tapped a control and the imagery shifted. Now it showed the intergalactic journey ships traveling through absolute darkness. The void between galaxies where no stars shone. Generation after generation born and dying in those metal coffins, never seeing a sun, never feeling natural gravity, their entire lives dedicated to keeping the fleet moving forward. The journey should have killed us, Okonkwo said. You calculated it perfectly. Our resources shouldn't have lasted. Our ship shouldn't have held together. Our society should have collapsed into chaos and cannibalism within the first century. You gave us just enough technology to survive, but not enough to thrive. A death sentence disguised as mercy. She smiled, and there was something terrible in that smile, not cruel, but utterly, completely beyond them. But you forgot something. Or perhaps you never understood it in the first place. Humans are really, really good at spite. A ripple of confusion went through the chamber. Several translators struggled with the concept. Spite, Okonkwo repeated. The determination to survive, not because survival is logical or optimal, but because giving up would mean our enemies were right about us. Every generation of our people was raised on one simple principle. The council said we couldn't make it. Let's prove them wrong. The imagery showed impossible ingenuity. Ships being rebuilt mid-flight with salvaged materials. Hydroponics bays expanded into entire artificial ecosystems. Generation after generation of children being taught engineering, physics, biology, every child a genius by necessity, because only the brilliant survived to pass on their genes. We turned our entire civilization into a 3,000-year university, Okonkwo said. Every human who lived during our exile was both student and teacher. We couldn't afford ignorance. We couldn't afford inefficiency. We couldn't afford to waste a single mind or a single idea. Do you know what happens to a species when every single individual is pushed to their absolute intellectual limit for 3,000 years? We could destroy you, Okonkwo said simply. All of you. Every world, every station, every ship. We have the capacity to sterilize this entire galaxy of sentient life within a standard year. Our fleet alone outguns your combined militaries by a factor of 300 to 1. And these are just the ships we sent ahead. There are more coming. Many more. She didn't wait for an answer. You get the ships you see at your borders. You get technology that makes your own look primitive. You get a civilization that's had 3 millennia to focus on exactly 2 questions. How do we survive? And how do we go home? The display shifted again, showing the human fleet's capabilities in detail. Defensive shields that could shrug off weapons that would vaporize planets. Engines that bent space-time in ways the Council's scientists had declared impossible. Manufacturing systems that could construct a new ship from raw asteroids in days. Weapons. Oh, the weapons that made the Council's arsenals look like stone tools by comparison. The chamber was deathly silent. Several delegates were openly weeping. Others had gone into defensive states, shells closed, protective barriers raised, bioluminescence dimmed to nothing. But, Okonkwo continued, and that single word carried more weight than entire treaties. We're not going to do that. Confusion replaced terror. Velshan found his voice. You're not? No, Okonkwo said, and her expression softened slightly. Because becoming the thing that destroyed us, that would be the real defeat. We didn't survive 3,000 years in the dark just to become another tyrannical force that solves its problems with genocide. She walked to the center of the chamber, slowly turning to address every delegate. Humanity learned something out there in the void, something we couldn't have learned any other way. We learned what we are when everything is stripped away, When there's no planets to explore, no resources to fight over, no external enemies to distract us, just ourselves, the darkness, and the long, long wait. And what did you learn? The Zephyron observer asked, his ancient voice trembling. That we're better than this, Okonkwo said, gesturing at the council chamber. Better than empires built on fear and control. Better than a cosmic order maintained by crushing anyone who questions it. You tried to kill us because we were different, because we challenged your comfortable hierarchies, because we didn't fit neatly into your millions of years of tradition. She pulled out a small data chip. This contains everything. Our entire history from the moment of the banishment until now. Every scientific advancement we made. Every philosophical breakthrough. Every poem, every song, every story told by every human who lived and died in the dark. Every lesson we learned about survival, about hope, about maintaining our humanity when inhumanity would have been so much easier. Okonkwo held it up. We're giving it to you. All of it. Freely. The shock that rippled through the chamber was profound. Ambassador Cathrell actually fell backward, his legs giving out. You what? That's you're giving us your technology? Your secrets? After what we did? Yes, Okonkwo said simply. Because that's what humans do. We learn, we adapt, we overcome, and then we teach. It's who we are. It's who we became out there. Every advancement we made was built on the foundation of the knowledge you left us, with knowledge from 1,000 different species, accumulated over millions of years. We didn't create this in a vacuum. We stood on the shoulders of giants, even if those giants tried to destroy us. She placed the chip on the central podium. But this comes with conditions. Not threats, conditions. Requirements for your own good and ours. Velshan stared at the chip like it might explode. What conditions? First, the Galactic Council is dissolved, effective immediately. Chaos erupted. Delegates shouting, translators overloading. Several representatives trying to activate security protocols that Okonkwo's ship had already disabled. She waited for the noise to die down, utterly unperturbed. You had 3 million years to bring peace and prosperity to the galaxy. What you brought instead was stagnation, tyranny, and the genocide of anyone who didn't conform. You're done. The council ends today. You can't just. Cathrell began. We can and we are, Okonkwo interrupted. Second condition. Every species gets full sovereignty. No more hierarchies based on how long you've been spacefaring. No more elder races dictating to younger ones. Everyone gets a seat at the table, everyone gets a voice, and everyone gets the freedom to develop as they choose. That's chaos, someone shouted. That's anarchy. No, Okonkwo corrected, that's freedom. And yes, it'll be messy, freedom always is. But it'll be your mess to make. Your mistakes to learn from, your successes to celebrate. Third condition. Any species that commits genocide, that attempts to banish or destroy another people, faces humanity's response. We will be the guardians of the exiled, the protectors of the banished, the nightmare of the tyrants. Never again will what happened to us happen to anyone else. She let that sink in. Fourth and final condition, you share that data freely. Every species, every world, every ship. Education becomes a right, not a privilege. Technology becomes a tool for uplift, not control. We raise everyone up or we deserve to fall. The Zephyron observer slowly rose to his feet. And if we refuse? If we reject these conditions? Okonkwo met his gaze without flinching. Then we leave. We take our fleet, we take our technology, and we go settle the other side of the galaxy. We'll build our own civilization and leave you to yours. But know this. Every species you've oppressed, every world you've controlled, every civilization you've held back, they'll know we're out there. They'll know there's an alternative. And eventually they'll come to us. She smiled again, that terrible knowing smile. You can lose your power violently today, or watch it erode peacefully over the next few centuries. Either way, the age of the council is over. The only question is whether you want to be part of what comes next. Velshan looked around the chamber at the faces of 300 civilizations, terror, anger, confusion, and underneath it all, something that might have been relief. How many of them had chafed under the council's rule? How many had been one bad decision away from facing humanity's fate? You said you learned what you are out there in the dark, Velshan said quietly. What did you learn? Okonkwo's expression softened. We learned that humans are at our best when we're helping others be their best. We learned that our greatest strength isn't our technology or our ships or our weapons, it's our refusal to let darkness, any darkness, extinguish hope. You tried to break us, and instead you showed us what we're truly capable of when we have nothing left to lose and everything to fight for." She walked back toward the airlock. "You have 1 standard month to decide. Dissolve the council voluntarily, implement the conditions, and we'll share everything we've learned. We'll help rebuild. We'll teach. We'll guard. Or refuse, and we'll leave you to the history you've made for yourselves." She paused at the threshold. "Either way, humanity is home. And this time we're not leaving." The airlock closed behind her, and Ambassador Kenji Okonkwo was gone, leaving behind only a data chip that contained the sum total of human achievement over 3,000 years of exile, and a choice that would determine the fate of the entire galaxy. Velshan picked up the chip with trembling hands. It was so small, barely larger than his smallest digit. He thought about the weight of it, not the physical weight, but the historical weight. 3,000 years of survival, compressed into this tiny piece of technology. The Zephyron observer approached him slowly. "I never thought I'd live to see this day," the ancient being said. "The victims becoming the victors but choosing mercy over vengeance." "They're not showing mercy," Velshan said quietly. "They're showing us what we should have been all along." He looked at the spot where Okonkwo had stood. "Call an emergency session, not of the council that's dead. Call a constitutional convention. Representatives from every species, equal voices, equal votes. Let's build something new, something better, something worthy of the chance they're giving us." "And if some refuse?" asked Cathrell, his voice small and broken. "If some try to maintain the old order?" Velshan thought about those 12,000 ships waiting patiently at the border. "Then they'll learn what humanity learned in the dark. Adapt or die. Change or be changed. Evolve or become extinct," he held up the chip. "But I think most will choose to change, because now they know what the alternative is, not human vengeance, but human disappointment. And somehow that's so much worse. The transformation of the galaxy didn't happen overnight. It took years, decades, even for the old order to truly crumble, and something new to rise from its ashes. But the moment Ambassador Okonkwo walked out of that council chamber, the future became inevitable. The data chip she left behind was everything she'd promised, and more. It contained not just technological specifications and scientific theories, but something deeper, a complete philosophical and social framework for how a civilization could maintain its humanity under impossible circumstances. Dr. Thalen Moros, the Craxian quantum physicist, was one of the first to fully dive into the human archives. He spent 6 months doing nothing but reading, watching, analyzing the 3,000 years of human exile. When he finally emerged from his study, his colleagues barely recognized him. "It's not the technology," he explained at a packed lecture hall on the Craxian homeworld, his forearms gesturing frantically as he tried to convey what he'd discovered. "Yes, their FTL drives are elegant. Their weapons are terrifying, their manufacturing is miraculous, but that's not what makes this archive important. It's the why behind the how." He pulled up a hologram showing a human generation ship, 300 years into the exile. "Look at this. This is the colony ship Perseverance." By this point in the journey, they were experiencing cascade failures in their life support systems. They had maybe 5 years before total collapse. Every projection said they were doomed. The hologram zoomed in, showing the ship's interior. Humans of all ages were visible, working with desperate intensity. Here's what they did. They cannibalized 20% of their habitable space to rebuild the life support, which meant 20% of their population had to double up in living quarters. They voted on it. Can you imagine? They democratically decided who would sacrifice their space, knowing some would have to live in conditions barely better than storage closets for generations. Dr. Moros's voice grew thick with emotion. "And you know what they called this period? They called it the compression, not as a euphemism, but as a badge of honor. They wrote songs about it. Children born in those cramped conditions grew up being told they were compression-born, and they wore it as a mark of pride. They took their suffering and transformed it into identity, into strength." He switched to another image, this one showing a classroom. Young humans sat in zero gravity, their faces illuminated by holographic displays. Every child in the fleet was educated to university level by what we would consider age 12. Because they had to be. Every mind was precious. Every bit of intelligence was a resource they couldn't afford to waste. They didn't have the luxury of letting anyone be average. "But here's the truly remarkable thing," Dr. Moros continued, pulling up document after document. They didn't just teach science and engineering. Every child also learned art, philosophy, history, music. They maintained orchestras on ships where they could barely afford the air people breathed. They held poetry competitions. They painted murals. They danced. His voice broke slightly. They danced. In the void between galaxies, knowing their great-great-grandchildren would die without ever seeing their destination, they danced. Because they refused to let the darkness take their joy. That's what this archive really teaches us, not how to build better ships, but how to stay sane, stay hopeful, stay human when the universe itself seems designed to crush you. The lecture went viral across the galactic net. Billions of beings watched it, and billions more began exploring the human archives themselves. What they found changed them. On the aquatic world of Kuvar, the philosopher-poets who had spent millennia contemplating the nature of suffering discovered human literature from the exile. The poems of Maria Chen, who had spent her entire 90-year life aboard the generation ship Undaunted, never seeing a sunrise but writing about them anyway, based only on ancestral memory and imagination. Her collected works, titled Letters to a Sun I'll Never See, became required reading in Kuvari schools. The warrior clans of Ashkar, who had prided themselves on their military traditions going back 1,000,000 years, watched footage of human training exercises during the exile. They saw humans pushing themselves past every physical and mental limit, not for glory or honor, but for the pure, pragmatic necessity of survival. The Ashkar combat masters were humbled. "We train for war," said High Commander Teren, who had once advocated for humanity's destruction. They trained for existence itself. Every human who survived that exodus is a warrior beyond any we've produced. But it wasn't just admiration that spread through the galaxy. It was also horror, a deep, soul-crushing understanding of what the Council had done. The Zephron observer, who had lived through the banishment, made his own pilgrimage through the archives. He spent a full year reviewing the records, experiencing every moment of humanity's exodus through their own eyes. When he finished, he called a press conference that was broadcast across every major world. The ancient being appeared diminished, as if the weight of what he'd witnessed had physically compressed him. "I voted for the banishment," he said, his voice transmitted to 1,000,000,000 listeners. "I stood in that chamber 3,000 years ago, and I voted to destroy humanity. I told myself it was necessary, that they were too unpredictable, too chaotic, too dangerous to the order we had maintained." He paused, his form flickering with distress. "I want to show you something. This is what I watched happen as a result of my vote." The display behind him showed a human child, maybe 5 years old, crying in her mother's arms as their ship fled from Earth's burning ruins. The mother was trying to comfort her, whispering that everything would be okay even as tears streamed down her own face. "This girl's name was Sarah Liu," the Zephron said. "She died 70 years later aboard the generation ship Defiant, having lived her entire life in a metal corridor no more than 5 meters across. She never felt rain, never saw a natural horizon, never experienced anything but recycled air and artificial gravity. She married, had children, taught them to dream of a world she'd never known, and died hoping they might one day see it." His form pulsed with grief. "She was one of millions. Millions who lived and died in the dark because I decided they were inconvenient to our order. I murdered them as surely as if I'd pushed them out an airlock. The fact that it took generations for them to die doesn't make it better, it makes it worse. We sentenced them to a slow death by exile and called it mercy." He turned to face the camera directly. "I cannot undo what I did. No apology will bring back the billions who died in the banishment, or the millions who suffered through the exile. But I can do this, I can bear witness. I can make sure that every being in this galaxy knows exactly what we did. And I can spend whatever time I have left ensuring it never happens again." The Zephron Observer became the first head of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, an institution proposed by the humans but staffed by volunteers from across the galaxy. Their mission, to document every atrocity committed under the Council's rule, to give voice to every species that had been oppressed, and to ensure that the lessons were learned and remembered. It was brutal work. The Commission uncovered horrors that had been hidden for millennia. Species driven to extinction for the crime of developing the wrong kind of technology. Worlds sterilized because their civilizations didn't fit Council norms. Entire cultures erased because they questioned the cosmic order. The Vaccine Collective, it turned out, had themselves nearly been victims of the Council 2 million years ago. They had been corrected, their entire cultural memory had been wiped and rewritten to make them more compliant. The revelation shattered Ambassador Cathrell, who had been one of humanity's most vocal critics. He traveled to Earth, the real Earth, now healing under human terraforming efforts, and requested an audience with Captain Elena Vasquez, the commander of the First Fleet. They met in a reconstructed park in what had once been Tokyo. Young trees, barely a decade old, swayed in the breeze. Real breeze from a real atmosphere that humans had spent 50 years rebuilding. The sky was blue again, though not quite the same blue it had been before. Nothing ever was, Cathrell supposed. Captain Vasquez was older than he'd expected, easily into her 80s, though human genetic modifications made age difficult to judge. She sat on a bench made from reclaimed metal that had once been part of a council warship, Cathrell realized with a start. "Ambassador Cathrell," she said, her voice warm despite everything. "Please sit." He did, his carapace clicking nervously. "I don't know how to begin this." "Then don't begin with words," Vasquez said. She pulled out a small device and activated it. A hologram appeared between them, footage from the Banishment, showing Vaxxan ships participating in the bombardment of Mars' colony. Cathrell felt his internal temperature plummet. "I didn't know. I thought we were only providing support vessels. You never looked," Vasquez interrupted gently. "None of you did. The council gave orders and everyone followed them. Because that's what you did for 2 million years. Question nothing. Obey everything. Maintain the order." "We were victims too," Cathrell said, and immediately felt shame at the words. "No, that's not. I mean, the commission discovered that the council had erased your cultural memory and rewritten your history to make you compliant." "Yes, we know." Vasquez turned off the hologram. "Do you know what the most valuable thing in those archives we gave you is, Ambassador? It's not the technology. It's the mirror." Cathrell's translator struggled with the metaphor. "You're all looking at what we went through and seeing reflections of your own traumas." Vasquez explained. "The Vaxxan had your memories stolen. The Kuvari were nearly wiped out in the Council's early expansion. The Thranks were forbidden from developing certain technologies. Even the Craxians, the mighty Craxians, were forced to give up their moon colonies 500,000 years ago because the Council deemed them too militaristic." She gestured at Earth around them. "Every species in the galaxy has been hurt by the Council. We weren't special. We were just the most recent, and we had the spite to survive and come back. But our pain doesn't erase yours, and yours doesn't diminish ours. Pain isn't a competition." "Then why?" Cathrell asked, his voice breaking. "Why give us the technology? Why help us? Why not let us suffer as you did?" Vasquez was quiet for a long moment. "Do you know what kept us alive out there? It wasn't spite, not really. That was just the fuel. The engine was something else." She pointed to a group of human children playing nearby, their laughter carrying across the park. Every generation in the fleet had to decide, what are we doing this for? Are we surviving just to get revenge? Just to hurt the ones who hurt us? That's a powerful motivator, but it's also toxic. It eats you from the inside. "Around the 700th year of the exile," she continued, "there was almost a mutiny. A whole generation that had been raised on stories of Earth, of the banishment, of the wrongs done to us, and they wanted to turn the ships around. Not to go home, but to come back and burn the galaxy to ash. They had the engineering knowledge by then, they could have done it." Cathrell felt his carapace go cold. What stopped them? A schoolteacher named James Okafor. He gave a speech that was recorded and became required viewing for every human born after. He said, "If we become the thing that destroyed us, then we really did die in the banishment. These ships will just be carrying our corpses forward through the dark. We have to be better than them. Not for their sake, for ours. Because the moment we let their evil turn us evil, they've won." Vasquez smiled sadly. "It became our central philosophy. Be better. Not perfect, we're human, we'll never be perfect. But better than we were yesterday. Better than our worst impulses. Better than the example set for us. That's what kept us human out there. That's what we're still trying to be." She looked at Cathrell directly. "So we give you the technology, we help you rebuild, we teach you what we learned, because doing anything else would mean James Okafor was wrong. It would mean 3,000 years of choosing to be better was wasted, and I refuse to believe that. Cathrell sat in silence, processing this. Finally, he spoke. The commission discovered something else about my people. Before the council corrected us, we were philosophers, artists. We believed that every species in the galaxy was a unique song, and together we made a symphony. The council found that belief problematic. They made us into bureaucrats and soldiers, he continued, his voice bitter. They took our songs and replaced them with regulations, and we forgot we ever had songs at all, until your archives showed us what it looks like when a people refuse to forget who they are, even in the darkest circumstances. He stood, his form straightening with new purpose. I cannot undo what I did, what my people did. But perhaps we can remember how to sing again. If you'll teach us. Vasquez stood as well, offering her hand in the human gesture of greeting. That's what we're here for, Ambassador. To teach, to learn, and to make sure the darkness never wins. Not for us, not for you, not for anyone. As Cathrell took her hand, his translator finally found the right word for what he was feeling. It wasn't forgiveness that would take time, perhaps generations. It was something else, something his language had lost 2 million years ago, but was beginning to remember. It was hope. 5 years after humanity's return, the Constitutional Convention finally concluded. It had been messy, chaotic, and filled with arguments that sometimes lasted for months. 300 species, each with their own languages, cultures, philosophies, and traumas, trying to build a government that served everyone equally. The humans insisted they wouldn't lead it. We're too new, Captain Vasquez had said. Too angry, too traumatized. Give us a few generations to decompress. Besides, this needs to be yours, not ours. We'll advise, we'll guard, we'll teach, but you need to build this yourselves. The resulting document was called the Galactic Compact, and it was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. No hierarchies based on age or power, no elder races with special privileges. Just one simple principle. Every sapient being, regardless of species, had inherent rights that could not be revoked. The right to exist, the right to develop, the right to be different. It's so simple it's radical, said the Kavari delegate who helped draft it. We spent millions of years building complex systems of control, thinking complexity meant wisdom. The humans showed us that real wisdom is knowing what's essential and protecting that, even when it's hard. The enforcement mechanism was elegant and terrifying. Any species that violated the compact faced not military invasion, but something worse: isolation. The humans would establish a protective cordon around the offending civilization, preventing them from leaving their system or receiving outside contact until they reformed. We're not your parents, Ambassador Okonkwo had explained. We're not going to invade and force you to be good, but we're also not going to let you hurt others. You want to be tyrants? Fine. You can be tyrants in your own system, alone, until you decide to join civilization. The choice is always yours. Only one species tested this in the first 5 years. The Draxian Empire, a mid-level power that had been a loyal council enforcer, decided they didn't need the new order. They continued their practice of enslaving lesser species within their territory. Humanity responded within a week. A single ship, just one, positioned itself at the edge of Draxian space. It didn't attack, didn't threaten, just sat there. Any ship that tried to leave Draxian space found its systems mysteriously failing. Not destroyed, just disabled and gently pushed back into Draxian territory. Any communication from the Draxians to the outside galaxy was blocked. The Draxian Emperor raged and threatened. He sent his fleet to destroy the human ship. The fleet arrived to find that the single ship was actually one visible ship and 200 cloaked ones, their combined firepower enough to vaporize every planet in the Empire 3 times over. Your move? Was the only message the humans sent. The standoff lasted 3 months. During that time, the enslaved species within Draxian space, having heard about the new compact through underground channels, began to rebel. Without the ability to call for outside help or acquire new weapons, the Draxian military found itself fighting on dozens of fronts simultaneously. The Empire collapsed from within. The former slaves established their own governments, applied for membership in the new Galactic Federation, and were accepted immediately. The Draxians themselves, humbled and broken, were given a choice: reform and rejoin, or remain isolated. They chose reform. Barely. "That's how it's done," Captain Vasquez said at the Federation Assembly afterward. "Not with the carnage of war, but with the patience of siege. We learned patience out there in the dark. We can wait. Can you?" But humanity's role in the new galaxy wasn't just as guardians. They became the teachers, the healers, the bridge builders. Human engineers worked alongside Craxian scientists to rebuild devastated worlds. Human doctors using medical knowledge refined over 3,000 years of making do with limited resources, helped cure diseases that had plagued species for millennia. Human artists collaborated with Kavari poets to create works that helped the entire galaxy process its collective trauma. And human historians worked tirelessly with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, ensuring that every story was told, every victim remembered, every crime acknowledged. It was in this capacity that Elena Vasquez found herself standing in the memorial garden on the moon Talos III. The garden was vast, covering several square kilometers. In it grew 3 trees for every human who had died in the banishment: 8,400,672,911 trees. But it wasn't just human dead memorialized here. The Commission had identified every species, every civilization, every culture that had been destroyed or damaged by the Council over its 3-million-year reign. Trees for the Vaxxan's forgotten songs. Flowers for the Thranx inventors who'd been executed for illegal innovation. Crystalline structures for the 17 species that had been completely wiped out. Water features for the aquatic civilizations that had been destroyed. The Garden of Remembrance, they called it. A place to mourn, to reflect, to ensure that the past was never forgotten. Vasquez walked among the trees, her aged body moving slowly but surely. She was over 90 now, approaching the end of even an enhanced human lifespan. She'd been 28 when the fleet returned to the galaxy. She'd spent her entire adult life working for reconciliation, for peace, for something better. She stopped at one particular tree, a young oak that represented a girl who'd died on Mars colony. 10 years old. Killed in the first orbital bombardment, never knowing why the sky had turned to fire. "We remember you," Vasquez whispered, placing her hand on the bark. "We remember all of you, and we've made sure you didn't die for nothing, Captain Vasquez." She turned to find a young Craxian approaching barely into adulthood by their species standards. He carried a datapad and had the eager energy of someone with important news. "Yes? Message from the Federation Assembly. They've just received a request. There's a species at the edge of charted space, the Yothran. They were recently discovered by a Federation survey team. Pre-spaceflight civilization, but showing signs of incredible technological innovation. They're maybe 20 years from developing FTL on their own." Vasquez felt a chill. Under the old Council rules, the Yothran would have been managed, their development controlled, their society shaped to fit Council norms, their independence stolen before they even knew independence was possible. "And?" she asked. The young Craxian's expression was complex pride mixed with nervousness. "The Assembly voted to leave them alone. Completely alone. No contact, no interference, no guidance. We'll leave monitoring satellites to make sure no one else bothers them, but otherwise we let them develop naturally. Let them make their own mistakes, their own discoveries, their own choices." He paused. The vote was unanimous. Every species, every delegate, everyone agreed that the Yothran deserve the chance to become what they're meant to be, without us imposing our vision on them. Vasquez felt tears on her cheeks. After everything, after all the pain and struggle and hard-fought battles to change minds and hearts, this simple moment of 300 species agreeing that someone else's sovereignty was more important than their own desire to control. "That's good," she managed to say. That's really good," the Craxian smiled. "The Assembly also voted to name this policy the Vasquez Doctrine in your honor. The principle that every civilization has the right to its own path, free from interference." She shook her head. "No, not after me. Call it the Okafor Doctrine, after the teacher who reminded us to be better. Or the Chen Doctrine, after the poet who kept hope alive in the dark. Or name it after that little girl." She gestured to the oak tree. Sarah Chen. Call it the Chen Doctrine. So every time someone invokes it, they remember why we needed it. They remember what happens when you think you know better than others how they should live. The Craxian made a note. I'll bring that to the assembly. I think they'll approve. He started to leave, then turned back. Captain Vasquez, I just want you to know, my people, the Craxians, we were taught growing up that the old council was necessary. That order required control. That peace required dominance. We were raised to believe that your people were the villains, dangerous, unpredictable, a threat to cosmic harmony. His voice grew thick. I'm so glad we were wrong. I'm so glad you came back. I'm so glad you were better than we deserved. Vasquez pulled the young Craxian into a hug, something that would have been unthinkable in the old galaxy. You're not wrong about us being dangerous and unpredictable, she said with a soft laugh. We absolutely are. But we learned something important. You can be dangerous and still choose not to hurt people. You can be unpredictable and still be trustworthy. It's all about what you do with what you are. She released him. Now go. Tell the assembly I approve of whatever they decide to name it. I'm an old woman who wants to spend her remaining days in this garden, remembering the dead and celebrating that their deaths led to something better. As the Craxian left, Vasquez sat down beneath Sarah Chen's tree. She pulled out a small player and activated it, letting the sounds of Maria Chen's Symphony for a Lost Son fill the air around her. The composition had been written 800 years into the exile, by a woman who'd never seen the sun but could imagine it perfectly through generations of inherited memory and sheer determination. It was beautiful, haunting and hopeful in equal measure, a testament to humanity's refusal to let darkness kill beauty. Other visitors to the garden began to arrive, drawn by the music. Craxians and Kuvari, Thranks and Vaxan, Zephrons, and a dozen other species. They sat in small groups, listening, reflecting, mourning their own losses while honoring humanity's. This, Vasquez thought, was what they'd come back for. Not revenge, not dominance, but a galaxy where different people could sit together in a garden of memory, listening to music born from suffering and choose to build something better. The sun was setting on Talos III, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, real sunlight from a real sun, touching a real world where people were free to be themselves. It was everything the billions of dead had dreamed of, everything the millions in exile had worked toward, everything humanity had refused to let die in the darkness. As the last notes of the symphony faded, Vasquez closed her eyes and smiled. They'd done it. Against all odds, against 3,000 years of darkness, against the combined might of the galaxy's oldest civilizations, they'd done it. Humanity had come home, and they'd brought hope with them. 20 years after humanity's return, the galaxy had transformed in ways that would have seemed impossible during the Council's reign. The Federation thrived not through dominance but through cooperation. Species that had been enemies for millennia now worked side by side. Technologies that had been suppressed for security reasons were now freely shared, advancing every civilization simultaneously. But Elena Vasquez had been right about one thing. Humans were dangerous and unpredictable. And sometimes those traits were exactly what the galaxy needed. The crisis came from the direction no one had expected, from the darkness beyond the galactic rim, from the same void humanity had traversed in exile. The first warning came from the monitoring stations that humanity had established along the old exile route. Something was coming. Something vast, moving through the intergalactic void, heading straight for the galaxy at relativistic speeds. The Federation Assembly convened in emergency session. The holographic display showed the approaching objects, thousands of massive structures, each one roughly the size of a small moon. They weren't ships in any conventional sense. They were constructs, artificial habitats on a scale that dwarfed anything the Federation had ever built. We've been trying to communicate with them for 6 standard days, reported Admiral Chen, Elena Vasquez's granddaughter, and the current head of the Federation Defense Force. No response. They're not hostile, but they're not stopping either. At current velocity, they'll enter Federation space in 4 months. What are they? Asked the Kuvari representative, her bioluminescence flickering with anxiety. Admiral Chen pulled up the spectral analysis. Based on the materials and energy signatures, we believe they're generation ships. Very, very old generation ships. The construction techniques suggest they're at least 50,000 years old. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. 50,000 years meant they'd left whatever galaxy they came from long before humanity was even spacefaring, before the Council was even formed, during an era the galaxy's oldest civilizations barely remembered. They must have come from Andromeda, said Dr. Moras, now the Federation's chief scientist. That's the nearest major galaxy, 2.5 million light-years away. Even at near-light speeds, the journey would have taken 2.5 million years, Admiral Chen finished. These ships have been traveling through the void for 2.5 million years. The implications were staggering. Whatever civilization had built these ships was ancient beyond comprehension. And now they were arriving, presumably full of beings who'd been traveling since before recorded history began. What do they want? Asked Ambassador Cathrell, who'd become one of humanity's closest allies. We don't know, Chen admitted. But there's something else. Our long-range scans indicate significant damage to many of the structures. Whatever these people went through on their journey, it wasn't easy. They may need help, or they may be hostile, warned the Draxian representative. The Reformed Empire had become surprisingly cautious after their earlier lessons. 2.5 million years of isolation could have turned them into something we can't recognize or reason with. Admiral Chen nodded. Which is why I'm proposing we send a first contact team. Not a military force, a small diplomatic vessel with representatives from multiple species, equipped with everything we need to provide humanitarian aid if required, but also capable of defending itself if things go wrong. And who do you propose to lead this mission? Asked the Craxian delegate. Chen smiled slightly. Someone who has experience with generation ships and impossible journeys. Someone who understands what it means to spend lifetimes in the dark. I'm going myself, and I'd like to request volunteer representatives from other species to join me. The response was overwhelming. Within hours, dozens of species had put forward candidates. The team that eventually formed included a Kuvari linguist, a Thranx engineer, a Vaxin cultural specialist, a Craxian doctor, and representatives from 7 other species. But there was one more addition that surprised everyone. The Zephyron observer, now over 3,000 years old and considered ancient even by his species' standards, requested to join the mission. I've lived through the galaxy's greatest shame, he said when questioned. I witnessed what we did to humanity, and I've spent 20 years trying to atone. Now we face beings who've suffered an exile that makes humanity's look brief. If anyone should greet them, it should be someone who understands the weight of that suffering. The Ambassador, a ship built using combined human and Federation technology, launched 3 weeks later. It was fast, maneuverable, and carried enough supplies to support a population of 10,000 for a year, just in case the generation ships needed immediate assistance. As they approached the incoming fleet, the scale became truly apparent. Each construct was enormous, covered in patchwork repairs that spoke of millennia of desperate maintenance. Some showed signs of recent catastrophic damage, hull breaches, defunct sections, entire segments that had been deliberately jettisoned to preserve the rest. They've been through hell, breathed the Thranx engineer, analyzing the structural scans. I don't know how they survived. By all rights, these ships should have failed 10,000 times over. The fact that they're still operational it's a miracle of engineering and determination. Admiral Chen ordered the ambassador to broadcast on all frequencies, using every known form of communication humanity had learned during their exile, plus every method the Federation's combined knowledge could produce. For 3 days, there was no response. Then, on the 4th day, one of the generation ships changed course slightly. Just a minute adjustment, but enough to indicate they'd heard. Then slowly, almost cautiously, a signal came back. It wasn't in any language anyone recognized, but it was mathematical, universal, starting with prime numbers and basic arithmetic, the foundation of all logic-based communication. The Kuvari linguist worked around the clock, building a translation matrix from the mathematical framework. After 2 weeks of painstaking effort, they managed to decode the first message. What it said made everyone on the Ambassador fall silent. Are you real? Please be real. We've been alone so long. Admiral Chen felt tears sting her eyes. She'd heard stories from her grandmother. Tales of the psychological toll of the exile, the loneliness, the isolation, the creeping fear that perhaps the rest of the universe had forgotten you ever existed, and humanity's exile had only lasted 3,000 years. These people had endured 2.5 million. She composed a response, carefully crafting it with input from every member of the team. You are real. We are real? You're not alone anymore. We are the Galactic Federation and we welcome you home. The response took hours to come back, likely because they were going through the same difficult translation process. When it did arrive, it was longer. Home? We left home so long ago that the stars had different names. We left because our galaxy was dying, the core had become unstable. Radiation spreading outward, killing everything. We fled, 200 million of us across 10,000 ships. We hoped we could find a new home. Find others. But the journey... The message paused and Chen could almost feel the weight of memory across the void. Ships failed. People died. Civilizations rose and fell entirely within our fleet. We forgot where we came from. We forgot why we were traveling. For 1,000,000 years, the journey was all anyone had ever known. Some ships went mad, attacked others. We lost 90% of our fleet. The remaining ships, we clung to each other because we were all we had. And we kept moving forward because stopping meant accepting that it was all for nothing. Chen looked around at her team. Every being on the bridge had tears or their species equivalent. Even the pragmatic Thranx engineer had developed stress fractures in his crystalline structure. Tell them, the Zephron observer said softly. Tell them that suffering has an end, that they've found what they were looking for. Tell them we understand. The ambassador moved closer to the generation ships, broadcasting continuously. Chen sent coordinates to the nearest Federation world. A beautiful planet called Haven's Rest that had been deliberately left undeveloped for situations exactly like this. A place where refugees could land, recover and begin again. We have worlds, she transmitted. Many worlds. Enough for all of you. We have food, medicine, support. You don't have to keep traveling. You can stop. You can rest. You can live. The generation ships began changing course, slowly turning toward the coordinates. It took weeks. Their engines were ancient, barely functional, held together by sheer determination and engineering genius born of necessity. As they drew closer to Haven's Rest, the ambassador finally got close enough for visual contact. Through the massive viewing ports of the generation ships, they could see beings moving. Not humans, not any species the Federation recognized, but people nonetheless. Shapes and forms evolved over millions of years in artificial habitats. They looked tired. Even across the void of space, even through the limitations of the scanners, they looked so very tired. The landing took months. The generation ships couldn't land. They'd been in space for so long that entering a gravity well would tear them apart. Instead, the Federation constructed orbital platforms and began the careful process of evacuating the refugees. 214,000 beings emerged from those ships. All that remained of the 200 million who'd begun the journey. They came out slowly, cautiously, many of them having never breathed natural air or felt natural gravity in their entire genetic lineage. Admiral Chen was there for the first group to land. She watched as they stepped onto solid ground for the first time in their lives, watched as they looked up at a real sky, felt real wind, saw a natural sun. Many of them collapsed, overwhelmed. Some wept. Others simply stood in silent amazement, processing sensations that their ancestors had described but they'd never experienced. An elder of their species, Chen's translator, struggled with the title but settled on Keeper of Histories, approached her. The being was frail, supported by others, but its eyes were bright with intelligence and emotion. Thank you, it said through the translation device. Thank you for being here, for being real, for not forgetting that the universe is vast and others might be lost in it. Chen knelt down to be at eye level with the elder. We almost forgot, she admitted. 3 million years ago, this galaxy had a civilization that thought they were the center of the universe. They forgot that others might suffer. They forgot compassion. She gestured to the Federation officials representing dozens of species, all working together to help the refugees. But we learned. Painfully, slowly, at terrible cost, but we learned. And now we remember. We remember that everyone deserves a home. Everyone deserves help. Everyone deserves to be seen, to be real, to matter. The Keeper of Histories looked at the organized chaos of the relief effort, Federation doctors treating the sick, engineers repairing equipment, linguists working to establish better communication, food being distributed, temporary shelters being erected. How? It asked simply. How did you all learn to work together like this? Chen smiled sadly. A species called humanity reminded us. They were cast out, exiled, forced to survive impossible circumstances. And when they came back, they chose to be better than those who had hurt them. They taught us that suffering doesn't have to make you cruel, that the darkness doesn't have to win, that you can remember pain without letting it define you. She stood, looking out at the sunset over Haven's Rest. They taught us that the point of surviving isn't revenge or domination. It's to make sure no one else has to suffer as you did, to turn your pain into purpose, your exile into empathy, your scars into strength. The Keeper was silent for a long moment. Then, these humans, we would like to meet them, to thank them for building a galaxy that could welcome us. Many of them are gone now, Chen said softly. Their exile was 3,000 years ago, and they're a short-lived species. But their children remain, their grandchildren, their legacy. She touched her chest. I'm one of them. My grandmother was Captain Elena Vasquez, who led the First Fleet home. And she taught me that humanity's greatest achievement wasn't surviving the darkness, it was choosing to bring light back with them. Over the following months, the refugees integrated into Federation society. Their technology, refined over 2.5 million years of desperate innovation, proved complementary to what the Federation already had. Their prospective beings who'd spent countless generations with nothing but each other brought new insights into cooperation and community. But more than that, they brought validation. They proved that humanity's choice had been right, that building a galaxy based on empathy rather than domination, on helping rather than controlling, on remembering suffering so you could prevent it, that this was possible, that it worked. The Federation had welcomed the lost, the weary, the traumatized, and in doing so, had become something unprecedented in galactic history. A civilization defined not by conquest or control, but by compassion. 3 generations later, the Academy of Remembrance stood on Earth, on the exact site where the last evacuation ship had lifted off 3,000 years before. It was a massive structure, part school, part museum, part memorial. Students from every Federation species came here to learn history, not the sanitized version, but the real one, the painful one, the one with all the mistakes and atrocities laid bare. In one classroom, a human teacher named Sarah Vasquez Okafor, descendant of both Elena Vasquez and James Okafor, stood before a mixed class of young beings from a dozen species. "Can anyone tell me," she asked, "why we study the banishment? Why we focus so much on humanity's exile when so many species suffered under the old council?" A young Craxian raised 2 of her arms. "Because it was the event that changed everything. The catalyst for the Federation? That's part of it," Sarah acknowledged. "But there's something deeper. The banishment matters not because it happened to humans, but because of what humans did afterward." "Anyone else?" A Kuvari student, her bioluminescence pulsing thoughtfully, spoke up. "Because they chose mercy over vengeance?" "Closer," Sarah said. "Let me show you something." She activated a holographic display. It showed Elena Vasquez, elderly and near the end of her life, giving her final public speech at the opening of this very academy. "People will want to make this story about humanity," the recording said. "About how special we are, how unique, how exceptional. But that's wrong. That's dangerous, because it suggests that only humans could have made this choice, and that's not true." The recording of Vasquez looked directly at the camera, as if speaking to this exact moment, this exact classroom. Any species could have done what we did. Any people, given the same circumstances and the same choices, could have chosen compassion over cruelty. The reason our story matters isn't because we're special, it's because we're proof that choosing to be better is always possible. No matter how much you've suffered, no matter how justified your anger might be. She paused. The old council fell because it forgot this. It believed that order required control, that peace required dominance, that security required oppression. They were wrong. And when they were finally challenged, they had nothing to fall back on but violence. Humanity's gift to the galaxy wasn't our technology, or our ships, or our determination. It was much simpler. We remembered that everyone hurts, everyone struggles, and everyone deserves a chance to choose who they become. We remembered that the purpose of power is to protect those who don't have it. We remembered that the point of surviving the darkness is to bring light back with you. The recording ended. Sarah looked at her students, humans and aliens, all learning together, all equal in this classroom that stood on ground where billions had once died. "That," she said softly, "is why we study the banishment." not to glorify human suffering or vilify the Council's species, many of whom were victims themselves. We study it to remember that every single one of you, regardless of species, has a choice. When you're hurt, you can choose whether that hurt makes you cruel or kind. When you're powerful, you can choose whether that power oppresses or protects. When you remember the past, you can choose whether it chains you to old hatreds or frees you to build something better. A young human in the back, no more than 12, raised her hand. But teacher, what if someone hurts you really badly? What if they kill people you love? How do you not want revenge? Sarah smiled sadly. It was the question every generation asked, the eternal struggle between justice and vengeance. You'll still want revenge, she said honestly. The people in the exile fleet wanted it. My ancestor, Captain Vasquez, wanted it. The difference is they didn't let that wanting control them. They felt the anger, acknowledged it, and then asked, what do we want more, to hurt them or to make sure this never happens to anyone else? She walked to the window, looking out at Earth's restored landscape. They chose the second option, and because they did, you're all here. You're learning, growing, becoming whoever you're meant to be, not what some ancient empire decided you should be. That's the real victory. Not vengeance, but freedom. Not destruction, but creation. Not darkness, but light. The bell rang, signaling the end of class. As the students filed out, chattering among themselves in a dozen languages, Sarah stayed by the window. She could see the memorial garden from here, its billions of trees swaying in the wind. So many dead, so much suffering, so much that could have turned humanity into monsters, but it hadn't. Against all odds, against every logical expectation, it hadn't. And because of that choice, made and remade every day for 3,000 years, the galaxy had changed. Not perfectly, there were still conflicts, still problems, still beings who chose cruelty over kindness. But the foundation had shifted. The baseline assumption was no longer that might made right, but that everyone deserved dignity, freedom, and the chance to become their best selves. Sarah's personal communicator chimed. It was a message from the Federation Assembly. They were voting today on whether to send an expedition to Andromeda to search for any survivors of the civilization that had sent the generation ships. It would be a journey of millions of years, possibly one way, requiring volunteers willing to commit their entire genetic legacy to the mission. Within hours of the announcement, 10,000 beings had volunteered. Humans, Crassians, Kuvari, Thranks, even some of the refugees from the generation ships themselves, all willing to venture into the darkness to search for people they'd never met, might never find, who might not even still exist, because that's what the galaxy had become, a place where the first response to discovering suffering wasn't to look away, but to reach out. Where the instinct wasn't to control or exploit, but to help and uplift. Sarah smiled and looked up at the stars visible through the classroom's transparent ceiling. Somewhere out there in the infinite darkness between galaxies, there might be others, lost alone, desperate, and if they existed, the Federation would find them. Not to conquer them, not to rule them, but simply to say, you're not alone. We remember what it's like. Let us help. That was humanity's real legacy. Not the ships or the technology or even the Federation itself. It was the simple, revolutionary idea that had sustained them through 3,000 years of exile, and now defined an entire galactic civilization. Remember the darkness, but don't become it. Survive the pain, but don't spread it. Return from exile not as conquerors, but as proof that choosing kindness over cruelty is always possible, always worthwhile, and always worth fighting for. The stars shone down on Earth, on the memorial garden, on the academy, on a galaxy that had learned slowly, painfully, but truly that the light only wins if you carry it with you through the dark. And humanity, the species that had been cast into the void and returned stronger, would never let that light go out again. Final message recorded by Admiral James Chen, great-grandson of Elena Vasquez, on the 100th anniversary of humanity's return. To anyone watching this 100, 1,000, or 1,000,000 years from now, whether you're human, or one of the hundreds of species we share this galaxy with, or perhaps someone we haven't met yet, I want you to understand something about the story you've just heard. This isn't a story about humanity being special. It's a story about choice. We were victims who could have become villains. We were exiled who could have become exilers. We were the hurt who could have become the hurters. Every single day of those 3,000 years, that temptation was there. It would have been so easy, so satisfying, so justified to come back with fire and fury, but we didn't. Not because we're saints, we're not. Not because we're somehow morally superior, we're not that either. We chose mercy because, in the end, we understood something fundamental. Becoming the thing that hurt you is the real death. Survival isn't just about keeping your body alive, it's about keeping your soul intact. If you're watching this and you've been hurt and who hasn't been, you have the same choice we did. You can let that pain make you bitter, closed, cruel, or you can let it make you empathetic, understanding, kind. Both are valid responses to suffering, but only one builds a future worth living in. If you're watching this and you have power, whether over one person or a billion, you have a choice too. You can use that power to control, to dominate, to enforce your will. Or you can use it to protect, to uplift, to give others the freedom to become themselves. History will judge you not by how much power you accumulated, but by how many people were better off because you had it. The Galactic Federation that exists today isn't perfect. We still argue, still disagree, still struggle with the eternal challenge of balancing individual freedom with collective good. But we do it together, as equals, with the understanding that everyone's voice matters, everyone's pain is valid, and everyone's future is worth protecting. That's what humanity brought back from the darkness. Not just ourselves, but a reminder to the galaxy of what it could be, what it should be, what it must be if we're going to survive and thrive among the stars. To the council that exiled us, you're forgiven. Not because what you did was acceptable, it never will be, but because forgiveness is how we prevent the past from poisoning the future. We remember what you did. We've built entire institutions to ensure it's never forgotten, but we won't let it define us, and we won't let it define you. Your descendants deserve better than to carry your sins forever. To every species that participated in the banishment, the same applies to you. Your guilt is acknowledged, but it's not inherited. Your children and your children's children don't bear responsibility for your choices. What they bear is the responsibility to choose differently, to build differently, to be different. And to every being who's ever felt cast out, forgotten, abandoned by the universe, whether your exile was literal like ours or metaphorical, whether you were cast out by societies, by families, by circumstances beyond your control, you matter. Your pain is real, your struggle is valid, and somewhere out there in this vast galaxy we've built together, there are people who understand, who remember, who care. You're not alone. You never have to be alone again. That's humanity's promise. That's the Federation's promise. That's the future we're building, one choice at a time, one act of kindness at a time, one moment of choosing light over darkness at a time. We were banished millennia ago. We came back stronger. Not stronger in hatred, but stronger in hope. Not stronger in vengeance, but stronger in vision. Not stronger in our capacity to destroy, but stronger in our determination to build. And we invite everyone, absolutely everyone, to join us in that building. The darkness tried to break us. It failed, and now we're making sure it fails for everyone else too. That's the story. That's our legacy. That's the choice we made and continue to make every single day. Choose wisely, choose kindly, choose hope, and remember, you're never too lost to find your way home. And it's never too late to become better than you were yesterday. The stars are waiting, and this time, we're all going together. This story is dedicated to everyone who's ever been cast out, pushed away, told they don't belong, and who chose to respond with compassion instead of cruelty, with building instead of breaking, with light instead of darkness. Your choice matters, your struggle matters, you matter. Remember the darkness, but don't become it. Survive the pain, but don't spread it. And always, always carry the light with you. The stars are for everyone,